Welcome, everybody. This is our sixth and final steering committee meeting. It's been a long journey, but we got a great program for you today. Let's get our business out of the way and get our roll call done. Committee member Carey. Here. Kites. Hagel. Yeomans. McCracken. Yeah. Hogan. Great. So we have a strong program today. Katie and Dale go over our draft urban design guidelines, and then we'll get into an adaptive reuse standards. And then I'll have a brief discussion on potential plan financing and funding mechanisms towards the end. And then we'll wrap it up and talk about the next steps as we go towards public hearings after the first of the year planning commission, and then on to city council, and hopefully adoption of the plan. And I know that there's been some side concerns, and we'll be happy to talk and work those out before we get to our public hearings and deal with those concerns as they come. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katie, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Luke. So we first wanted to address some of the issues that were raised at the previous steering committee meeting, specifically related to the specific plan compliance matrix. There were some concerns addressed that the 50% of the appraised value may not necessarily be the best threshold to require full compliance with the specific plan. So we've gone back and re-looked at this issue, and we're now proposing that if a building addition exceeds 50% of the current market value of the existing structure or structures on the site, that then all of the code requirements would kick in at that point. And I think that was the only issue really that we wanted to follow up on. So any questions about that? No?
Katie?
Yes.
Who would it fall on to determine who the 50% appraisal? Would it be the applicant?
It would be the applicant.
So you would have an approved appraisal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so jumping into the draft urban design guidelines. We've been working with our architectural consultant. Many of you probably remember him, Frank Miller from Inland Planning and Design. And we have come up with some draft design guidelines and some goals, which we hope the specific plan will achieve. So the first of which, to create a new district that has a unique and memorable urban look and feel. Number two, ensuring that the buildings in the Uptown Jefferson specific plan area are of high quality design and constructed of high quality materials. Three, encourage building design to incorporate authentic and diverse architectural styles that do not try to recreate the historic character of Old Town. So creating a district that's going to be unique and different from what's happening in the Old Town area. And that is reflecting back what we heard during the visioning. Number four, encourage design of buildings, streets, plazas, and other public spaces that are scaled to the pedestrian and supportive of positive pedestrian experiences. And five, encourage buildings to have a positive engagement with the various open spaces within the district. So buildings engaging with Marietta Creek, the future park space that's up in the detention basin area, as well as the future trail. So as far as the architectural design guidelines are concerned, we want to touch upon three kind of sub-elements, the first of which is building form, number two, building frontages, and then we'll jump into a discussion on some of the draft architectural design principles that we've come up with. So this is a slide showing the three basic building forms. The first of which, this is a multi-story block, so it's 4 stories. The building's set and positioned on the build-to line, which is 10 feet behind the property line. The second building form is also a multi-story block, but with the upper floor setback, kind of creating a usable space adjacent to the street. And again, the building is at the build-to line. And number 3 is the forecourt, which is similar to the multi-story block, except for the building has a recessed area that kind of creates a quasi-public space at the street. So jumping into item number 2, the building frontages. We've identified 8 basic building frontage types, and a lot of these you'll probably be familiar with. I think we talked about them at the second steering committee meeting. And so basically, and you can see in the sketches, the building form, which is shown in tan, and then the frontage type is shown in pink. And the shop front is a building frontage type that's placed close to the street. Typically, the building entrance is at grade with the sidewalk, and a lot of the times the shop front is kind of the typical frontage type used for retail type businesses. The gallery is a frontage type that has an attached colonnade that projects a little bit over the sidewalk. The 2-story gallery is the same thing as the 1-story gallery, with the exception of the colonnade can go up to the 2nd story. And the forecourt, again, is a recessed building facade that creates a semi-public space adjacent to the right-of-way. The arcade is has an attached colonnade where there's usable building space above, which is a little bit different than the gallery. And then the tall arcade is the same thing, the colonnade that projects out, but does go up above the 1st floor. The stoop is an elevated entry that corresponds directly to the building entrance, and typically stoops are used for residential development. And the stoop is raised up, making the residential units able to have some privacy from the street. And the porch frontage is an elevated entry that corresponds, again, directly with the entrance, and it has a covered shelter and can run the length of the entire building facade. So our urban design guidelines will specifically discuss how to combine the building form and the building frontages. So the sketch that you can see there shows, for example, a 4-story rectangular block combined with a 1-story gallery, a 4-story forecourt building form combined with a 1-story arcade within a forecourt, and a 4-story building with the 5th floor stepped back combined with a 1-story arcade frontage type. And as you can see, the primary building facade is set on the build-to line, and then the frontages kind of create that interest along the street. And basically, the building form and the building frontages are the basic urban architectural elements that set the foundation for good urban design. And the building forms and frontage types can be mixed to create that pedestrian scale and walkability. And then, of course, all of the architectural stylistic treatments are added later, such as windows, canopies, different things like that to enhance the street. Any questions about that? No? Okay. And seeing none, we'll move on to our architectural design principles. So before I get into these principles, just wanted to mention something unique and different from the Old Town specific plan. Right now, the Jefferson plan, we're not proposing to require any specific architectural styles. Like the Old Town specific plan had certain architectural styles that we wanted projects to follow, whereas in Jefferson, we're leaving it open-ended kind of to allow for more organic development, to get a more eclectic feel, and we felt like that was more appropriate because there really is no historical context within the Jefferson specific plan area. So these are some principles that we've come up with in working with our architectural consultant. So we have the principle paired with a photo. So the first one, project should provide authentic representations of architectural style and architectural detail. And so in this photo, you can see kind of based upon the building character and the materials used, the flat white stucco, the red clay tile roof, the arches, that it is authentically a mission style building. So we're looking for authentic representations of architecture. The photo on the bottom of the slide, we want to see a mix of building forms to create a lively street edge. And in this photo, you can kind of see there are 2- and 3-story elements combined with, I think the building in the back is about 6 stories, combined with different tower elements and awnings to create interest along the street. Building facade should have a base, middle, and top, which you can see in that photograph on the top. There is a distinctive base, middle, and top to that building, kind of breaking up the massing. And we also want to encourage the use or variation in colors and materials to enhance the different parts of the building and kind of break up that larger building facade along the street. So the photo on the top, the massing and scale of buildings should be divided into smaller components. So with this building, we have the different patio elements, the recessed building entries that kind of break up the larger box of the building. In the photo below, awnings, canopies, and overhangs are encouraged to be added to pedestrian entrances and at the floor level to create a more pedestrian-scaled environment along the street. And so in this photo, this is a picture of the U.S. Grant Hotel in downtown San Diego, which is a very massive building, but the addition of the larger windows and the awnings and the canopies out there make it more pedestrian scale. So it's friendly to the people who are walking along the sidewalk. It doesn't feel like this big, massive building. Wall planes visible from the street that exceed 50 linear feet should be broken up to give the appearance of multiple building facades. So the photo there, you can see that that is one large project, and it looks like about every 50 feet, there are pop-outs in the wall plane, different colors and materials that are used to kind of break up the building and give the appearance of multiple buildings put together. The photo below, architectural details should be provided at the human scale to help ground the building and engage the pedestrian. So in this photo, we have the wider sidewalks, some landscaping, larger windows, just to add interest to people who are walking along the street. And again, reflecting back from the visioning, people thought that the open space, Marietta Creek, and the trails were important amenities. So kind of to reflect that, the design guideline is to say that projects should be oriented toward these spaces and that the projects will not turn their back on Marietta Creek, the open spaces or public plazas, and to really engage those spaces. A combination of different frontage types are encouraged to add interest to the building facade, which we kind of saw in that sketch. And this is actually a photo example of how to combine the different building forms and frontage types. So in this photo, you can see the building furthest away, that's an arcade frontage type with kind of the basic block building form next to the shop front, which is then next to the two-story gallery, and it really kind of creates an interesting streetscape by combining those different frontage types. So jumping into roof forms, variation in roof forms will be encouraged. Like in this photo, you have the different roof forms, a hip roof, gable roofs, different roof heights that really break up the massing and add interest. Buildings that are located on the corners and the intersections, we thought that it would be important for them to kind of be interesting and take advantage of their placement on the corners as being very visible. And we want those buildings to be enhanced with different cornice features, tower elements, different roof shapes, and roof line variation, which you can see in the photo. They have that kind of unique tower element at the corner. So jumping into a design guideline related to when we have buildings that are stepped back, we want to encourage the use of that space. With the rooftop space, maybe utilizing that space to include a terrace, a patio, or maybe a restaurant space or other outdoor gathering amenity on that rooftop. And this design guideline also kind of makes a nice view for people who are looking out the window onto these roof spaces. We're also intending that all residential units will provide private open space just to kind of balance the urban environment so that people can have an outdoor space to enjoy. Pedestrian amenities including street furniture, bike racks, landscaping, lighting, and trash receptacles are encouraged to make walking more attractive and more convenient. So you can see in that photo they have the nice light fixtures, the pretty landscaping, and the bikes, just again, pedestrian scale. Restaurants are encouraged to have sidewalk cafes to activate the public realm, so to have that activity out on the street. We want to encourage that throughout the entire specific plan area. Terminated street views, we want to encourage those to create enclosure, human scale, and a sense of place. And the photo there, that is Main Street at the mall. And so you can see the 2 rows of shops on either side of the street, and then the yard house at the end of the street, kind of terminating that view, really adds interest. It kind of draws the pedestrian or, you know, anybody who maybe wants to shop in that area in, instead of just having a straight shot looking all the way down the street. So the photo at the bottom, there should be no blank walls on any side of a building that fronts the public realm or is visible from the street. So we're looking for projects to have architectural detail, any facade that's facing the street or an open space area, that it looks like it's finished and detailed. And on the flip side of that, if something's facing an alley or a parking lot, a blank wall could potentially be acceptable. Any questions related to that? As far as the architectural styles, we are leaving that open-ended. But as far as the urban design principles of having the buildings pulled up to the street, that is what we are trying to accomplish.
And the other approach is viable is what
At how the design guidelines would impact that, we haven't specifically, although in looking at Kaiser Marston's study, we feel confident that there will be a market at some point in the near future to support this.
I think their study addressed the actual
True.
market. That was just one of my questions that I'll bring up.
Okay.
In that.
Sure.
And we can chat about it, because I've seen some styles and some.
Because of the rents that are able to be collected.
The rents, the architectural, like, even, that reminds me. Footprint for my,
The case that we're not requiring.
well, I like what you're doing, you know. I don't think I'm done. Not development to be frightened of it.
Any other questions? Good? Okay, very good. So I am going to turn the presentation over to Dale West, and he's going to talk about the adaptive reuse standards that we've come up with.
Good evening, everyone. Okay. So Patrick just mentioned about offices in San Diego that are converting to residential or condos. So we wanted to add an adaptive reuse component to the specific plan. And it's for that conversion of older economically distressed buildings to convert them into more economically viable uses, such as dwelling units, apartments, artist lofts, joint living and working quarters, otherwise known as live-work units. And the other purpose is to reduce vacant space and promote a mix of uses, create new and innovative housing opportunities within the city that don't currently exist, and to encourage employment-oriented uses in close proximity to residential uses. So in defining an adaptive reuse project, we're really talking about converting the commercial into a residential. So it's, again, the conversion of older economically distressed buildings into residential dwelling units and live-work units. And each unit itself will have to have a toilet, bathing, and kitchen facility in it. And then the residential units will be permitted as part of an adaptive reuse project, so long as the use is permitted in that zoning district. Okay, so we tried to come up with a number of incentives to help encourage this. For mezzanines, loft spaces and live-work units, artist lofts, residential dwelling units, which do not exceed more than 33% of the existing floor area of the space below the mezzanine, will not be considered new floor area. And why this is, we consider this to be an incentive is, remember in the last steering committee meeting, we talked about the compliance matrix, and if you add 10 to 50% of the floor area, you would have to comply with certain standards of the code, and in this case, you would not have to. For density, the residential units shall not be subject to the minimum target or maximum density requirements, nor will they be subject to the minimum maximum building height requirements. For off-street parking, the number of parking spaces shall be the same as the number of parking spaces that existed prior to the adoption of the specific plan. And then the adaptive reuse project will not have to go to a public hearing. It'll be an administratively approved project, but it will be required to go through that notice of intent to approve, which we talked about, I believe it was last time as well. There'll be 3 findings: that the use will not jeopardize, adversely affect, endanger, or otherwise constitute a menace to the public health, safety, or general welfare. That the uses surrounding the proposed location of the adaptive reuse project will not be detrimental to the safety and welfare of prospective residents. And that the adaptive reuse project will not displace viable commercial or industrial uses in the surrounding area. Any questions on that section?
On your previous slide, I think it's item number 3, talked about off-street parking. The required number of spaces shall be the same as the number listed on the site prior to the, so are we going back to a industrial standard or a commercial standard? What standard are you holding for?
If it was an industrial project and it was parked at industrial standards and they wanted to add residential to it, we would not require additional parking on that site.
That's kind of confusing because you're going from plan and then reverting back to the previous usage. How do you park this? That's kind of a statement. That's what you're trying to say here.
I think what we envisioned is that the parking wouldn't have to, you wouldn't have to increase or add parking to a project in this case. So you're adding a different use to it, but we're not requiring you to add additional parking.
Like the example with the artisan live work, let's say that someone buys an industrial. They want to create a lot of apartment. And on the weekends, they could possibly open up their you're probably not going to substantially increase the parking. A lot of the other buildings are bit. I think that's kind of the intent. The other thing is when you have some, auto repair business. What I think the hope is that until such time as land values rise to the point where people will go in and remove and that you extend you at least allow someone to properly in the it could be an industrial space where, and we see this a lot with right now where we have a lot of microbrews are going in the industrial park. Well, this might give them the ability to add a food or restaurants. And so we're saying that the existing parking is pretty much set because the site is developed. But with on-street parking, they're probably not going to create a parking problem that is going to give people more options. Let's have
Any other questions? Okay. Luke's going to come back up and talk about the funding mechanisms.
Okay, so I wanted to give a brief overview of the financing and funding mechanisms. I know we've talked about this throughout our steering committee meetings as well as our visioning process, and I know Patrick has mentioned the demise of redevelopment many times. But and while the specific plan is is mostly a zoning and land use document, we are required to provide some commentary and language on how we think and what we think the funding mechanisms might be to move this forward. So we've identified 5 that we think are the most viable. There are probably others, but these are strong tools. And like I said, redevelopment, that is a huge tool that we lost. It is so powerful, in fact, that we still put it on here because we're crossing our fingers, hoping and praying that someday something to Jerry Brown. Yeah. Hopefully something someday will come back that will allow cities to take advantage of the powerful tool. I mean, we saw that in Old Town with the parking structures, with the streetscape, with multiple mixed-use projects, spurring development along the way over a 10 to 15-year span into what we have today. So we put it up there as a placeholder. Hopefully it'll come back. The number 2 on the list is the City Capital Improvement Program, which is really the most likely means of a funding mechanism for this area. Every year the city goes through a process where it budgets money for infrastructure and facility improvements within the city. And we envision, as we move forward, trying to get money set aside in this budget, probably most likely to start with Jefferson, the streetscape itself, which is what we did in Old Town. If you remember back to 1998, the very first improvement, I believe, in Old Town was a $9 million streetscape of Front Street. front and main, actually. So where you see the rolled curbs and the light standards and everything, that was the very first redevelopment project. But if we can get the backing, we'll get it into the budget, and that is most likely the first thing that will happen as far as a funding mechanism. Third on the list is infrastructure and financing districts. What this is really it's a special assessment that property owners choose to impose on themselves. It can only occur after a supermajority vote of the landowners in the specific area, and the money that is generated from this financing district has to be kept within the district, and specifically for infrastructure in this case. And it's similar to a business improvement district, which is number 5 on the list, but a business improvement district is a levy placed on businesses, obviously with the business owner's consent, where the funding can stay in the district, and it can also be used for infrastructure, but it can also be used for other things like graffiti removal and security, and marketing of the area as a whole. Parking district, this is probably quite a bit down the road, simply because parking districts are usually set up utilizing city parking, so on-street parking, and then either city lots or city structures. But you can only really charge for parking when there's a scarcity of parking, and right now there might be pockets where there's some scarcity, but most likely just around the corner there's a sea of parking, and so charging for parking is not really realistic right now. But down the road, what would happen is there would be a parking district, and similar to the business improvement district and infrastructure district, as far as the money that's collected through parking fees, so meters or within structures, is retained to be used within the district itself. These are what we see as being highly viable. I mean, they're being used in other places. I think of Pasadena, downtown Pasadena. They have a parking district there. I think they have a bid as well, but I know that their parking district has been highly successful and has been noted as being one of the major things that helped turn around that area back in the 90s. So while infrastructure, financing districts, parking districts, and the business improvement districts are really incumbent on support from our property owners and our business owners, the most viable option going forward from the city's perspective is the capital improvement program, and that's what we're going to go for in the future. Now, we'll be writing all this into our plan. We also have to take a look at the costs of all the infrastructure, and there will be discussion of that in the financing plan, and then we'll try to match up as best we can with these types of programs and mechanisms. And again, like I said, it's at this point, I wish that we could say that we had all the funding in the world to get all these things off the ground right away, and there's a timeline, and as soon as the plan's adopted, we're going to get to constructing Jefferson, but that's just not the case. So are there any questions? No questions? Are you sure?
Well,
That's what I thought.
so we won't see this until like 2016, right?
We won't see what?
Any,
Well, no, I mean, it could happen any year, really. Yeah.
Actually, the CIP is part of the budget, up in July.
okay.
This plan will be placed March. It's likely there'll be projects that can apply to the capital improvement program for the way the CIP works is they are
Great. Well, that's it for me. I'll ask Katie to come back up.
Okay, so we just wanted to talk again quickly about the project schedule, since this is our last steering committee meeting, and thank you all so much for participating and sticking with us through meeting number 6. So you can see, there we are, December of 2013, finishing up the steering committee meetings. After this, staff will be extremely busy focusing on getting the draft-specific plan ready to be released to the public and getting the draft EIR kind of wrapped up and finalized. That will go out for a 45-day review before it's able to go to Planning Commission and then eventually to City Council. So we are right now looking at late March as probably the earliest time frame for us to be able to get this plan and EIR approved. And again, before we close, just wanted to mention the project website. We'll be updating this periodically just to make sure that, you know, if you need information about the project or the status, that we'll update the website and you can get it there. And then, of course, my contact information is on the website as well. Thank you. Thank you. All right, very good. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Run a good process, especially subject to my many questions and all of which positive. I appreciate it's gonna be, it'll take time to get this thing off the ground. As Patrick said, probably reshaping this plan as you go too. You have to, because you don't know what it will really look like.
Right.
And what might be Frank and vice versa. Jefferson corridor is, hope some of this financing, redevelopment agency came back. Anyway, I appreciate staff's effort and all your cooperation. It's been really.
Sure, thank you. We appreciate your input. It makes a better plan to bring up the questions and have us look through, you know, work through the issues, so we appreciate it. Carl?
Katie, quick question. By the way,
Sure.
I concur with them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, when this goes to the planning commission, look at the process we've gone through, and there's been a lot of information. Obviously, you're presenting this more, I mean, you're gonna go through the process of what's going on, we've done, and how we got into it. A lot of information for that night. Oh, night, or is it?
Well, it's probably the only item on the agenda. Given that what we'll do is have a plan in draft form, we'll be doing individual readings. Copies of the plan. It should be.
Sure. And the draft document and EIR will post it on both the project website and the city's website. And I'll probably send an email out just saying, you know, the draft plan is up, you can check it out. So, all right, let's adjourn. Thank you.